Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the incredibly complex world of personality disorders. We're going to use a mental health nursing guide to help us break down what they are, how they're categorized, and why they can be so challenging, not just for the people experiencing them, but for everyone around them. So let's start with the biggest question of all. We all have our own quirks and ways of being, right? But where is that line? When does a simple personality trait cross over into something that's considered a clinical condition? That's really the core distinction we need to unpack today. Here's a quick look at our game plan. First, we'll nail down the definition. Then, we'll get into the why behind these conditions. After that, we'll walk through the three main groups of personality disorders. And finally, we'll touch on what it all means when it comes to care and support. Okay, let's jump right in. What is it that actually elevates a set of personality traits from being just, well, part of someone's personality to a clinical disorder? The key word here, the one that changes everything, is pathological. We're not just talking about being introverted or a bit dramatic. A personality disorder is about deeply ingrained, really inflexible patterns of behavior. They're so maladaptive that they cause serious problems in a person's life and a lot of distress. And this right here points to one of the biggest, most fundamental challenges in treatment. For the person experiencing it, these patterns often don't feel wrong or dysfunctional at all. It's just how they see the world. And if you don't think there's a problem, why would you ever seek help? So you start to see these common threads pop up across many different personality disorders. Think about it. A healthy personality is flexible, it adapts to stress. But here we see a kind of rigidity. There's often a real difficulty in connecting with others emotionally and patterns of behavior that honestly just tend to create a lot of conflict in relationships. Okay, so that naturally leads to the next big question. Where does all this come from? How do these deep, unbending patterns even form in the first place? Well, the research points to a pretty complex mix of things. And the answer is, well, it's complicated. It's almost never just one thing. There's a huge psychosocial element. Things like childhood trauma or abuse can play a massive role. Then you have biology. Genetics can make someone more vulnerable. And on top of that, these disorders often show up alongside other issues like substance use. It's a tangled web. I think this image is such a perfect way to picture it. Imagine your personality is a structure you build throughout your whole life. For most people, that structure can bend and flex with life's storms. But with a personality disorder, it's like the structure has become totally rigid. So when the pressure hits, it doesn't bend, it cracks. Now, to help make sense of all this, these disorders are usually grouped into three main categories, or clusters. Let's kick things off with the first one, Cluster A. This group is generally defined by behaviors that other people might see as, well, odd or eccentric. So within this first group, you've got two key disorders to know. Schizoid personality is all about emotional detachment. It's a profound disinterest in forming relationships. Schizotypical, on the other hand, is a bit different. It's more about active eccentricity. You see odd beliefs, maybe magical thinking, and that's what makes social interactions so tough. So think of it as passive withdrawal versus odd engagement. Okay, moving on to Cluster B, and this is a group you've probably heard about, even if you didn't know the clinical term. It's characterized by behaviors that come across as dramatic, emotional, or erratic. And it all really boils down to major challenges with controlling impulses and regulating emotions. A really well-known example here is borderline personality disorder. At its core, there is this intense, overwhelming fear of abandonment, and that fear just fuels instability everywhere, in relationships, in a person's sense of self, in their emotions. This can lead to some really impulsive and sometimes, tragically, self-harming behaviors. And to really get a handle on BPD, you have to understand this defense mechanism called splitting. It's basically a kind of all or nothing thinking. A person is either all good or they're all bad. There's no in-between. So a friend who was perfect yesterday can become the worst person in the world today over a small mistake. This black and white view creates so much chaos and instability. Now, check this out. Two other disorders in this cluster, histrionic and narcissistic, can seem really similar from the outside, but their motivations are totally different. Someone with histrionic personality has a deep need to be the center of attention. Someone with narcissistic personality has a deep need to be admired. See the difference? It's wanting all eyes on you versus wanting all praise for you. All right, that brings us to our last group, Cluster C, and the common thread tying all of these together, anxiety and fear.
A powerful internal feeling of insecurity and inadequacy is what really drives the behaviors in this cluster, though they can look very different on the surface.
And what's so fascinating here is how that same core feeling of anxiety can push people in completely opposite directions. With dependent personality disorder, the fear of being alone is so strong it leads to extreme dependency on others. But with obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, it's the fear of losing control that takes over, leading to this rigid perfectionism and orderliness. Okay, so let's wrap things up by talking about why all of this matters. Why is it so important to understand these conditions, not just for doctors and nurses, but for all of us? No matter which cluster we're talking about, there's one area that takes a huge hit: relationships. That inability to connect, the deep-seated mistrust, or the patterns that just seem to invite conflict, it can all leave a person feeling incredibly isolated and misunderstood. And that, of course, just makes everything worse. And when it comes to actually managing these conditions, there is one thing that comes before everything else: safety. Because of the intense emotional distress and the impulsivity we see in some of these disorders, there can be a very real risk of self-injury or sometimes even violence. Safety has to be the #1 priority. So I want to leave you with this final thought. It's so easy to just label these behaviors as difficult or bad, but these aren't character flaws. They're incredibly complex mental health conditions, often with roots in deep trauma and biology. And when we can move past the labels and try to understand the pain and fear that's driving these behaviors, well, that's the first real step toward empathy and toward finding better ways to support people.